Guten Tag aus Berlin. Ich freue mich sehr, Sie im Namen der
Good afternoon
Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung
from Berlin. I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. This is the 22nd edition of Böll.Global. I'm Eva Sandra, Director of the Department for the European Union and the United States at Böll Foundation, and I will be your host this afternoon. Some technical information, which you also find in the chat, is what I want to share. We will speak German on this panel, and there will be simultaneous translation into English. And if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A functionality. And of course, you can ask your questions in German or in English, and we will come back to your questions in our debate. Now, after the summer break of the European Parliament, we would like to focus on the European elections, and we would like to show you the distribution of seats in the European Parliament. I hope you can see it. Now, this distribution shows that the democratic and pro-European forces are weakened, so they have to collaborate much better in order to make sure that the EU stays negotiable, so to speak. We have a number of guests here this afternoon, and we will talk about what the results of the elections mean for the cooperation in the Parliament and what impact this might have for the European Commission. We will also talk about the implications of the elections for the member states. And you know that they have triggered a number of effects in some of the European capitals. And of course, we will also look at the next legislature and about the difficult political and geopolitical situation. I'm happy to welcome Terry Reintke, lead candidate of the European Green Party and Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, co-chair of the Greens Eva Group. Welcome, Terry, and best regards to Recklinghausen. You will travel to Brussels later today. And we're happy to have you here because a lot is happening these days in Brussels and in Strasbourg. Von der Leyen will make her proposal for the 26 commissioners in the next few days. She was re-elected also with the support of the Green Party with 401 votes of 620 all in all. So, Terry, my first question goes to you. What impact do the election results have for your work in the Parliament, and where are challenges and risks and opportunities? Thank you, Eva, and thank you for organizing this exchange. I think it's very important because people talked a lot about the Commission and the elections in June and July, but the topic has dropped a bit from the headlines. But I think it's important to talk about it because we need to talk about the question what the elections mean for Europe and what the results mean in particular, because we will also have US presidency elections later this year. And we all know that elections have a major impact also on the EU and the development of the EU in the next 10 to 15 years. Let's talk about majorities first of all. The most dramatic result is that we have more right-wing extremists in the European Parliament now. We have an even further right-wing party in the Parliament these days, more right-wing even than the AfD, which has an impact on the mood. I mean, we could feel this mood already in the Parliamentary Assembly when the Parliament was constituted, and this is really bad. You have more and more authoritarian votes and people in the Parliament. So this is certainly the most dramatic impact. And there are two more negative aspects I need to underline. Now, the Green Party parliamentary group has lost about 20 mandates and has become much smaller, which is, of course, bad for the influence we can exercise in Parliament. And there is also this push to the right, not only with respect to the Green Party, also the Liberals have suffered. The Liberal Party is quite progressive, and the FDP in Germany is not necessarily the reference for the general liberal policy in Europe, but they have also lost mandates, and thus it's getting increasingly difficult to get a pro-European majority in the parliament. This is a major problem for us, the Green Party, but at the same time, we do see an opportunity here because we need to collaborate as much as possible, as close as possible, meaning we need to have extra meetings. We need to get together one more time in order to really debate and discuss and struggle, and in order to find a way to really implement ideas like the Green Deal or also the rule of law within the Commission. Because if you look back at the last 5 years, you realize that the European institutions, and with respect to the Parliament, I need to underline this, the Parliament has been the most progressive of all the European institutions, and I think we have to work on this furthermore in the Parliament, and especially also in the parliamentary group of the Green Party. I think this is a major opportunity I see, and we, the Greens, negotiated a lot before the summer vacation. And we also tried to have our say with respect to the European guidelines, and we supported Ursula von der Leyen, as you've said before. And now we will try and make sure that the Commission gets a setup that corresponds to this particular European idea. Well, thank you, Terry. As I said, the pro-European majorities have to move closer and have to agree in a binding way. The re-election of Ursula von der Leyen has been a signal, I'd say, but maybe you could also tell us a bit more about the guidelines. What was important for you, the Greens, and what is your success here? Now, let me tell you, first of all, this was not about contents only. This was about how these guidelines were to be adopted, because, as you might know, the Conservative parliamentary group had relevant voices in its rows saying, well, the Green Party has lost, so they should just wait in the sidelines together with the others so that we can push our ideas through. And we said, no, this is not acceptable. We said, we are willing to talk. We are willing to become members of a majority, and parliamentary groupings, which includes Poland, but also Italians, were not included in the negotiations, and they have not been part of the majority formation. And this was for us a moment in which we said we need to keep these right-wing groups out of the majorities. But this does only work if you take the Green votes on board, if you include the Greens, right? Another aspect was the Green Deal. The question was, what will happen with respect to the Green Deal? And I think we were quite successful in our negotiations. I mean, you do not always hear those aspects in the guidelines, or when the guidelines are mentioned, but this is a major and an important political project which could be saved and maintained. The strategic dialogue and also the agricultural guidelines have been presented. Now we can also talk about industry policy, and we can also talk about a number of goals we are pursuing and we would like to keep up. And these are important pillars, and we've been quite successful in our negotiations. So I'm really happy to see that there is a clear green mark also in the overall process. And against the backdrop of developments like in countries like Italy, the rule of law needs to be a priority on our agenda. I think this is going to be a real political struggle in the months to come, especially in view of the majorities within the EP. But we have undertaken important steps, and this has also been part of the guidelines and is enshrined in the guidelines. So the European Parliament will certainly furthermore push hard in order to have these guidelines implemented, because we still have clear majorities for these ideas in the European Parliament. And a last point I would like to make. which is important to the Green parties, but I think it's important to many, in spite of the fact that this topic is often overlooked or ignored. But this is about social cohesion, right? We do have a situation in many member states where the budgets, the state and public budgets are off. And we've always underlined that we need major investments in the field of transformation, but also in general in society. And we need scope in order to not undermine the social cohesion, because we do see that in many member states where there is an increasing divide between those who have and those who have not. This needs to be done, because otherwise authoritarian parties benefit and they get to the power. So these were priorities for us in the negotiations. And last but not least, of course, we need to bear in mind that guidelines are somewhat vague, which is why we need to make sure that the mission letters for the commissioners are quite clear with respect to what is to be done and in which context, because they need to get a concrete task and really know what draft bills and directives and proposals are to be put on the table so that what we want to do can be done at all. Thank you very much. I would like to come back to the strategic priorities of the Green Party, and I would like to ask you one more question concerning the composition of the new European Commission. We'll know more on Wednesday. In October, we'll know who the new commissioners will be, and the Parliament will confirm them. So what do you see? What do you expect?
Well, first of all, concerning the timeline, if I'm informed correctly, I think this has been postponed. So we do not yet know whether we will manage to confirm the commission before the US elections. And concerning the question of commissioners, there are two negative developments, and one at least is not so positive from our point of view. Let me start off with the piece of news that is negative for us. There is no green candidate for the commission. We, of course, worked in that direction in the past few months, but due to the fact that in the only member state that has been negotiated for a coalition agreement, the country where the president of the commission has been nominated. For that reason, there is no candidate from the Greens now, but we do hope that we can make up for that with other posts. And thus, for us, when it comes to implemented our guidelines, it is of central importance. And the second negative piece of news, not just from a green point of view, but for everybody who celebrated that the last European Commission had a parity concerning gender and gender equality. We are still far from having a 50-50 relationship, and this is really a step back when it comes to gender equality in the European Union. Ms. Peter Hansen was a junior member of the European Parliament during the last legislative period. She was so happy that there was a commission with gender parity, and as a young woman to see that this has been rescinded, and well, a man was simply suggested, and they said we won't obey to any conditions. And with my feminist heart, this is a real blow. And the third item is the following. I do not think this is going to change dramatically, but it looks as if Italy will get the office of a vice president, and in the Fratelli Italia, the Giorgia Meloni party, did not support Ursula von der Leyen on the European Parliament, and they abstained from voting. And the fact that this party or government is rewarded by giving them the office of a vice president, this is not acceptable. And we will make this very clear, not just based on the fact that that it means more power on the Commission, and thus the whole EU would thus be moving into the wrong direction. But it's also due to the fact that the very successful coalition establishment, well, is more or less counteracted by that. And this will clearly mean a far more rightist trend, and we will really work in the direction that this is still will be changed. And in the committees, the individual Commission candidates have to be confirmed individually and then as a group. And I would say I wouldn't bet on that, but I do not believe that this Commission will look exactly the way Ursula von der Leyen is going to suggest it. And I really assume that it is not only in this parliamentary group, but it will also be other parliamentary groups that will complain and voice their opinion. And maybe there will be post nominations of a woman, for example, or that the vice president office would also be held by a woman. And it may sound very technical, but in reality, concerning the portfolios, our big concern is that there may be a formation of silos, like, education and the environment. There will be one female vice president and two female commissioners, and they would, do what they want. And whenever they want something, they have to present this to their male colleagues. But it should be a mainstreaming of such topics. Of course, there should be female commissioners, but the economy, competitiveness, industry, we need a clear intertwining here, because we can already tell how certain forces in the EU are trying to play off competitiveness against decarbonization, although we are convinced that these are two sides to the same coin, and this will be very important in the next few years. And we do hope that there will be a clear intertwining, so that these topics will not be marginalized, but on the contrary, they should be in the center of legislation in the EU. Sorry, this was a very long contribution. Oh, don't worry. Let's come back to the work of the European Union. You already touched upon the fact that key offices will be highlighted by you. And before the summer break, the posts have also been distributed concerning the committees, among others. And what does that mean for you and your work, the work in the delegations and committees? How can you pursue your priorities here? That's a very good cue. Thank you for mentioning this, because, forming coalitions is one thing. One might say, okay, you've been at the negotiation table and you somewhat influenced at the political guidelines and made yourself heard. But the gender question was discussed independently of that. In theory, yes, but in practice, this is interlinked. I always said during that week where the elections were held, it was a little bit like a dance that we performed. We as Greens are new to this majority, and we supported the president of the parliament, and then we heard reactions from other pro-European positions. And Nicholas Fonica, the vice president candidate, together with other pro-European candidates, he was elected in the first round. And then the election of the Commission President took place. And then with the Single Market Committee, we continued our work. And let me mention the right to repair or the charging cords. These are important milestones concerning a circular economy, among others. And for that reason, it's really important for us to keep this committee, which we did. And then in the Human Rights Committee, the head of the committee and cooperation in human rights issues like defending human rights activists and defending the freedom of the press. All this will be very important. And on top of that, because we still have these activists, and there is one post that would have been assigned to the right-wing extremists, but it was said that we will not elect right-wing extremist heads of committees. So culture is what we maintained. And when the Freedom Act, for example, the freedom of the press. So for that reason, this is a very central committee for us, and we elected heads of committees that will all do an excellent job. And well, we got more than we are entitled to. And this is due to the fact that we are part of majorities. And we also want to make clear that we are very programmatic as Greens, and we are very much, we are very pragmatic and facts-driven. But when it comes to having an influence and when you want to make use of power, you need key posts. And for that reason, with these committees, we've been able to negotiate central positions, and our delegates will do an excellent job and implement into practice what we call for. Okay, let me ask one question. The EU enlargement, and with Gabriela Polinsky, you also have the US delegation. You have the head of delegation. And can you tell me where you see showstoppers? Because during the month before the European elections, we already had the reform debate, the enlargement debate, and it was held that both aspects need to go hand in hand. Well, how about the new European Commission? Will they prioritize that? Well, concerning this topic, it will very much depend on who will be in charge, because it should get a higher priority than during the last commission, and this with the nomination of the right commissioner, so to speak. But as I have heard, this will most probably be the case. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball, but these nomination processes are often very long and slow, and there are setbacks. But anyways, I do hope that they will gain momentum, and not just concerning Ukraine, but also the Balkans. And they should also benefit from the new dynamism. And as you already said it, this is a priority for us, but these seem to be seen as, the institutional reform of the EU and the enlargement on the other hand. And this is seen as two very slow activities. And I really think they should really fuel each other. For example, how can you simplify the procedures? For example, majority decisions, not when it comes to common foreign and safety policy. Often it is one person who blocks certain things. Well, let me name a spade, Mr. Orban. So often we don't reach progress because in many member states there is a very obvious interest. For example, the Baltic states, And when it comes to Ukraine, we do not want an endless procedure lasting decades, but they should reach progress fast. Well, ultimately it means, and we have to be as honest, it doesn't always have to do with blocking among individual member states, but it also has to do with how accessory candidates are developing. And with Serbia, there have been very negative developments in the past few years. And for that reason, I think and hope that we'll get a positive dynamism. I already mentioned the US elections. From a global perspective, the weight of the European Union, for example, the rule of law or human rights. There is a high level of responsibility in the EU, and on the global stage, they may have to assume a lead role even more so than in the past. On the one hand, it depends on our weight, but also our ability to act. For that reason, institutional reform and enlargement really need to be going hand in hand. So they should really fuel each other instead of slowing down each other. And we as Greens will really exert pressure and make it a priority in the next few years. Thank you very much. Due to the fact that you have to leave early, I would now like to welcome Roderick Kefferpütz, and he is the head of our foundation in Brussels. Roderick, I look forward to your assessment, and after that, we would like to hear Terry again. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. I think Terry very well described the current political situation and also the various negative developments, but there are also some silver linings, and let me mention a few positive aspects.
The first ones would be the guidelines, and I'd say that Ursula von der Leyen's guidelines marked green. There were major electric campaigns from right-wing and left-wing extremings. There were lots of stakeholders who mobilized against the European Green Deal. And Mrs. von der Leyen said, we'll keep the Green Deal alive. And she said she would like to have a recycling program in the first 100 days of her reign, plus a decarbonization, green industry deal. And she would like to also launch a fourth program for the climate adjustment. And these four programs show that there is a clear green stance here. And then, of course, we need to see that the Green Party is among the smaller groupings in the parliament, but there is a vice president and there are important chairpersons of committees. So the Green Party has possibilities to shape things. And we do have new members from new countries, from Italy, from Romania, from Lithuania, from other countries. And at the same time, we do have members of parliament who are experienced, like the former European commissioner and the former mayor of Palermo and of Riga, if I'm not mistaken, and from Denmark, an ex-minister. So people who are politically experienced and know the craft. And then there is the third positive message I would like to get across, which shows that there is more potential for more positive developments. And that's the setup of the European Commission. A few weeks ago, there were only 5 women or 5 candidates. Today, it's 10. It's still not enough. It's still not the 13 we had in the last commission, but I'm confident I mean, I would bet on it. And I think the Commission which is being presented now will probably not be the Commission we will get in the end. And I'm convinced that in the end, we will have 13 female candidates. And last but not least, even though we don't have a green commissioner, there are strong candidates like Teresa Rivera from Spain, who also fought for the Green Deal prior to the elections. And I think it would be important that Mrs. Rivera gets a good portfolio, because I think we need to have the industry or the greening of the industry in the mainstream. And we also need an industrial Green Deal VP to make sure that this happens. But we'll know more on Wednesday. Thank you. Terry, you'll get an opportunity to answer in a minute. But there are two more aspects I would like to briefly touch upon. Mario Draghi's report about the enhancement of the European competitiveness, which was presented today, and also the Green chairperson for the Commission, for the IMCO Commission for the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. So maybe you could talk about this aspect, and you could maybe also briefly touch upon migration and asylum policy, because we see a hardening or a harshening even in the debates all over, and especially also in Germany after the regional elections in Saxony and Thuringia, which were widely commented on. We do see what happens in Germany. So I wonder, what are your priorities here in the field of asylum and migration? There will be negotiations or deliberations on the latter topic. So, Terry, there are a number of aspects you can talk about, and I guess you will catch your train afterwards. Yeah, right. I need to apologize. I'm really sorry that I have to go in order to catch the train, but I hope I will be able to at least listen to what you say when I'm on my way. Now, let me start and talk about migration, because this is clearly shaping the political debate. And I think this is one of the topics which in the public debate triggers a major toxic mood. That's at least what I see. And people don't talk about the question, what can be done? And this is not meaning legal, illegal, but what can be done, what is viable or feasible in the particular realities in a given country. So people are getting angry and emotional when it comes to this topic. But I think we only find a solution once we agree to really focus on what needs to happen. And the question is, of course, what can be done in order to better equip different authorities, including the foreigners' authorities, because every municipality I'm talking to, people say it's a real disaster because we don't find people who want to work in this field anymore. So this is a problem among many problems we'll have to deal with. Also, the question of integration matters. So how can we better integrate the people who are here into the labor market and other fields? Now, we have just adopted our migration policy. The Green Party has a very clear opinion concerning this topic, and we will now try to implement our ideas, because one of the major problems with respect to migration is the fact that the law is not being implemented, neither in the countries nor at the borders. And I hope that the new Commission will do better than the former Commission did in this respect, because I think we have to collaborate much closer here too. I mean, raising the internal boundaries or borders in the EU would be a real disaster for the EU in terms of the civil rights, but also in terms of the economy. I mean, everybody is benefiting from the possibilities of transit the EU offers within the Union. So we do need more support for municipalities, more funds, more qualification, more integration courses, and also insistence on sanctions for countries that do not comply with the law at their borders. So that would be, in a nutshell, what we think or what needs to be done with respect to asylum and migration. And maybe we could furthermore talk about this topic at the next event, because I'm pretty sure that this topic will be with us for a long time. Now, sustainability and the environment. I think Roderick has reminded you already of the fact that we managed to get a lot of what is important to do into the guidelines. And I'm always happy if people realize what we do. I mean, we spend nights, days and nights in order to make the things as green as possible. So I'm particularly happy if people realize that this is happening here and there. So let me briefly focus on two other topics. On the one hand, the reduction of red tape, reducing bureaucracy. I mean, this is a vague term and people understand very different things when someone says less bureaucracy. Some would want to just do away with the environmental laws we have, which would be horrible. But I would like to rather talk about licensing, permits, and an acceleration of the processes. I mean, we need new infrastructure in order to implement the energy transformation, and we need to be much quicker when it comes to traffic and transport and ways within the EU, and we need less red tape. I mean, that's meant in a positive way. We have to better equip the authorities so that they can grant licenses much faster. And not a lot needs to be done, but it won't work if we only focus on the administration only, because I've learned in the last 10 years, and I've been a member of the EP for a while already, is that if you don't offer a benefit to the member states, they rather work against each other than with each other. So we need incentives with respect to competition, but also with any other challenge. So we have to be smart in supporting, and we have to be smart in investing. And that's the best way to move forward. As you've heard, I'm living in the Ruhrgebiet region, and you all know about the future of German steel. ThyssenKrupp played a major role in the debate in the last few months. Now, if you have 30,000 employees in a company, you have to consider even more jobs which are connected. And if you have major industries like the steel industry and subsidies, and people don't really like the word, but these are actually strategic investments. This is in order to enhance the infrastructure and the economy as a whole. And that's not only for the benefit of ThyssenKrupp, but it's for the benefit of everybody, because it helps us protect the climate, and it also helps us be capable of action on an international scale. In Germany, in the last few years, we realized what this means, right? So in order to be competitive, in order to remain competitive, we have to do the right investment now. And this is also an aspect we will have in mind when looking at the different candidates for the upcoming EU Commission. So it's going to be interesting. Right. We know that you have to leave, you have to catch a train in order to get to Brussels. So thank you very much, Terry, for your insights and opinions, and for all the knowledge you have shared with us, and we will certainly keep talking. All the best for you. All the best for your negotiations. It hasn't become easier to implement your priorities, but there are still opportunities and chances. So all the best once again. And all the best with warm regards to all your colleagues. Right, and you have a good debate. Right, and we'll now talk to three directors of Heinrich-Böll Foundation. I introduced Roderick Kefferpitz already, and now I'm very happy to welcome Joanna Maria Stolarek, director of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation in Warsaw, and Mark Berthold, our director in Paris. Now, if you can hear me, I hope that Joanna will join us soon. And while we wait for her, I would like to ask a question to Mark. What about France and the EU elections? You had long negations by Macron, who appointed Michel Barnier as head of the negotiating committee. Now, I would like to know more about the government formation in France from you. What is happening in France, I wonder, and what will be the impact, and what does this mean in terms of European priorities? Which priorities do you see in France under Macron and in a Barnier government? Mark, the floor is yours. Thank you, Eva. Terry said before that people tended to overlook or forget about the results of the European elections overnight. Actually, it happened overnight in France. People didn't consider Europe anymore. People looked at the French situation in France. However, nobody really knew what Macron's calculation was when he said he would connect or bind his destiny to the electorate result. It was not possible to have his party become the strongest, the most powerful one, because there was a new People's Front of socialists and the Green Party and communists in the first round. And then in the second round, which was necessary, there was a similar approach because the candidates of Macron's party Ensemble connected with the New People's Front, so they would not neutralize each other.
And the Front National would thus be on third rank, and the People's Front was ranking third, and the People's Front, Rassemblement National, and the Macron Alliance, and they really share 1/3 each. Macron actually definitely wanted to avoid a government of the New People's Front, and Ms. Stetz, she was a former clerk of the city of Paris. He definitely did not want her, and a former socialist, Mr. Cazeneuve, was nominated, but really with the interest of creating a rift among the People's Front, which was not successful. And now a number of names have been quoted, and now it became Michel Barnier. And he enjoys a lot of respect Europe-wide, and it was lauded that he was also a chief negotiator in Europe, but in France people are more critical. And before the nomination, there were reports that Macron had discussed with Marine Le Pen, and that the Rassemblement would not automatically would be subjected to a vote of non-confidence. And now there he has the criticism of being somewhat dependent on the right-wing extremists in France. And the independence of Michel Barnier vis-à-vis the president is open to question, but it will not be possible to get rid of him as easily as with the other candidates. But nonetheless, what majorities can he achieve in order to be able to act at all. So, in other words, it remains very critical, and it will be a very busy autumn. So there is no new government yet, and the Parliament is now meeting today, and in the next 2 months, key decisions will have to be taken. And now coming back to the original question, Sorbonne 2, what remains of it is at most the striving for more European autonomy, and Ms. Breton is nominated as a vice person by Macron, and thus we'll see what will be presented on Wednesday, and of course we'll see what is going to be the result of the parliamentary hearing, and Macron will continue to be interested in a lot of, nuclear aspects. Otherwise, we do not know what initiatives he'll take, because he will be more busy in terms of domestic policy. This is my initial statement. Thank you. And I would now like to immediately move over to Joanna. Joanna, well, Hungary is president on the council, and Poland will take over in January. And what does it mean for the Tusk government, and what priorities can be seen from the Polish government for the next few months, and then particularly with a view to the imminent presidency? Thank you for the question, and hello to everybody. First of all, we have to say that the EU elections led to the fact that the relatively new government, the so-called Tusk government, had to introduce many changes, because the vice minister is also the vice, he was a candidate for the European Parliament, and for that reason the government had to be reshuffled really. And for that reason, the relatively new government, it's not consolidated yet. It's the government coalition has been somewhat shaken, which again meant for the voters that there is a certain level of distrust. And it was obvious in the media and in expert comments. The candidature of those candidates took place apparently because of the money, because you can make a lot more money in Brussels compared with Warsaw. And this, of course, led to a certain level of distrust in the population vis-à-vis politics in general. And this has been even reinforced. For that reason, the elections were really important. The Polish people is enthusiastic concerning the European idea, but Poland is one of the biggest member states in the European Union, and they would need to take on a leading position also in politics because of the war of aggression from Russia on Ukraine. And as the Eastern Rim, so to speak, in the EU, it has to be taken account of, especially, and in addition, in migration policy, this becomes clear also with a view to the imminent presidency on the European Council. And speaking in general, after the EU elections, directly afterwards, there were polls how satisfied the population was with the results of the government, and how satisfied are they with the Donald Tusk policy. And a few days ago, the latest one was published, and 50% of the population do not approve of the policy, and 53% said that Tusk was not a good prime minister. Only 35% approve of him. For that reason, it is obvious that the government has given rise to high expectations in the run-up to the election, and from the peace takeover, the expectations have not yet been fulfilled. It's not long ago, but on the 15th of October, the first anniversary of the new government coalition will happen, and there's a lot of silence in the coalition, and there's a high level of many points where the coalition parties are not sure, they do not agree. For example, reproductive rights here, despite the promises made in the run-up to the elections, a change in the law will not happen soon. And it is often said that the Polish president, Mr. Duda, may be against. Donald Tusk himself said in an interview yesterday, he quoted figures, it is 300 something days to go until we can really get started, because then we'll have a new president. They say the priorities of the government are the rule of law and also the remainders of the peace government. And this is what you see in the country, and security policy, and of course a militarization of many aspects. For example, the hard migration policy, the pushback at the borders to Belarus, at the Polish-Belarus border, and they quote security reasons for that. And I do not know whether this answers all your questions or whether you would like an add-on. It was really a hodgepodge of different topics, so the situation is not very clear. Well, you identified everything very well. Maybe one question: where should the Polish government give a real impetus? What is your assessment? Well, Poland is preparing for the presidency on the European Council, and one aspect was quoted as being the single market and the economic side of economic cooperation within the EU, and security, migration, but also the topic of digitalization and the sustainable development. Thank you very much, Roderick. I've got one question for you concerning Germany and priorities of the federal government. On the one hand, I'd like to know what are the reactions to the election results in the EU, and also Saxony and Thuringia. It is no secret that the so-called traffic light coalition resulted weakened from those elections, and how can you make it successful? Thank you, Eva, for this question. I think the problem that we are seeing in Europe at the moment really fits very well into Mark and Joanna's presentations. There's a lack of leadership in Europe. France, in terms of domestic policy, is really busy. Joanna just said that Poland is also having a conflict with the president. So, and the same, really, a lack of consensus also in Germany. So in the past few years, in Brussels, when talking about German, they kept quoting the German vote. And what is the German vote? They abstain everywhere because the traffic light coalition can't reach agreement. And this German vote is a problem because if Germany abstains everywhere, there is a lack of leadership in the whole of Europe. And after those regional parliamentary elections, well, what often was subject to a joke, the German vote is more serious than it appears because it became apparent that maybe some kind of slide happened. So it is not that coalition partners, a certain number wouldn't be able to reach agreement, but it really touches upon all of them. So it kind of reshuffled the entire structure. For that reason, there is a lack of partners, and this gave rise to concern among the other European states. And one consequence, one rumor that's being spread is that the definition of the upcoming financial framework that should happen in summer 2025, that it should be postponed to the time after the German parliamentary elections, so that a European topic does not conquer or influence the election process. But there are priorities where you simply need that. And this is, for example, competitiveness. The Draghi report says between 500 and 800 billion euros in order to actually master the digital revolution. And there are many suggestions. And the European single energy market, capital market. But without a strong German federal government, I fear that a lot of progress will not be reached. And instead, people will check how the federal government is going to position itself so as to gain new momentum then. Thank you very much. And before moving on, a question on cooperation. I would like to give the two of you the possibility of reacting, because Roderick mentioned some aspects that are also relevant in a European context. What is the role of the federal government and in Paris and also in Warsaw? We heard comments, and how do you assess the policy of within the lack of leadership within the European Union?
Soll ich anfangen? Ja, also ich meine, das deutsch-französische Verhältnis, das war ja schon schwierig, trotz vieler
The
Bemühungen
German
auch wirklich
French
da,
relationship
dass sich also schon
has always
Momente
been
gesehen haben, dass die
difficult in the last few years. At least lots of ministers were here in order to really have a new beginning 70 years after the Élysée contract. However, the situation has become even more difficult because there is going to be a new French government, and there are the tactical approaches of the right wing. And we also need to consider the political culture in France. I mean, the left-wing alliance and Macron did not really make each other offers, compromises, agreements, coalitions. I mean, in view of the current election system in France, this has not been possible. It hasn't existed, and any attempt to implement it has failed. The Greens and the Socialists. Now, I mean, there are forces in both parties, in both political parties, who try to argue in favor of a collaboration with Macron and his political party. But in the tactical context, it seemed to be much more important to stay in the alliance with the Popular Front, or the People's Front, because there will be re-elections next year, and the National Assembly will be dissolved, and everybody expects new elections from happening. which means that you will need the People's Front once again, unless they implement a new election system. Nogel, for example, the chairperson of the Green Party, has proposed a new system, but whether this works, whether it's possible to agree across the political party blocks to implement a different election system remains to be seen. The new Prime Minister asked for a more rigid migration policy, and a few years ago, he even asked whether it's still possible to have the European law prevail over the French law. So it's going to be difficult, and it remains to be seen what this means on the European level. And it remains to be seen what the specific dynamic will mean, the dynamic Roderick has just described. So it's difficult to be optimistic in this situation. Yeah, if I may. I mean, the Polish government has also managed to instrumentalize the idea of the rule of law, and the hope for a reestablishment of the rule of law is, of course, a major aspect in the Polish debate. It is happening much too slower at least than people would wish. And people are pondering numerous questions, including things that happened in the times of the peace government. So the question is the current government a powerful one, or is it a toothless tiger, as they say? The Polish perspective, however, insinuates a weakened Germany, and lots of people think that Poland should play a stronger part. However, the country stops itself from doing so because it focuses on the many things which need to be done on the national level. And because it has to focus on what has been done by the former government. So they are cleaning up, and it's a very slow and cumbersome process. Takes time. That's the way it is. However, since you mentioned the triangle, France, Poland, Germany, I mean, Poland could be maybe in this chain a member in between, so to speak, like a mediator between France and Germany. Also in order to empower Central Europe. And then the right-wing forces, because that's the other side of the coin. A year ago, progressive forces won the elections in Poland, and they are now forming the government. Nevertheless, the right-wing extremist political party even managed to get into parliament, and members of the Peace Party who had been sentenced in the past found a refuge in the European Parliament. So in spite of not being allowed to be members of parliament in Poland, they have become members of the EP.
Bekannt wurde, dass in Sejm Chanukka gelöscht hat. Diese Leute sind auch im EP vertreten. Und diese
So people who did not want to have Chanukka celebrated in the same, for example, are now present in the EP. And they want to shape Europe according to their rules. They want to connect with the other right-wing nationalistic parties and members of parliament, and this is a danger we should not overlook. And then Poland has proposed a commissioner who closely collaborated with Donald Tusk. Ruffin is his name. Well, we see whether this is going to happen. I mean, whether he'll be elected or not. Losing control and framing the fact that people lose control or institutions lose control. I'd like to come back to this aspect because it triggers a feeling of helplessness in central parties, which triggers a loss of trust and confidence. Any ideas how to get out of this dilemma? Yeah, well, kind of difficult question. This is about establishing a European Union that can act. And I do see two levels. On the one hand, the EU needs the money. And Mario Draghi said 700 or 800 billions are needed for the transformation. But the question is, where does the money come from? Now, on the one hand, we could focus on the internal market and the capital market, where we do see a certain push, and Olaf Scholz, together with President Macron, talked about options, and they are also working on a document. They know that they have to move here, and I am kind of confident that something is going to happen here. And then, of course, we need funds in order to re-establish the European competitiveness and the European security policy. I mean, the support of Ukraine and the possibilities of defending the EU are at stake here. And actually, you need money. Without money, you can't do anything at all. So the question is one involving euro bonds, for example, incurring a pan-European debt. But here too, you need partners, allies. Look at the Netherlands, but they also have a right-wing extremist party, Austria. There will be elections to the National Council in Austria, and maybe the right-wing extremists will be powerful there too. So it's going to be ever more difficult to take decisions in Europe. Also because of the right-wing extremists who are not only getting stronger in the European Parliament, but also in the European Council, where the governments are represented, and of course in the Commission, where you have the commissioners, right? And it's getting more difficult because, as Joanna said, this is about changing the EU from within, or at least the EU should be capable of action, capable of maneuvering in order to not generate the frustration that empowers the right-wing parties at the elections. So the overall situation is a somewhat pessimistic one. However, we should not lose hope because there's no other way out. Joanna, Mark, do we change the mode? Can we change the mode? Mark. How do we change the mode, would be the question. Well, I agree to what has been said. 99%, I think, of what he said is right. However, Europe can also go a different way, and that's what I would like to believe, and I believe in it, actually. I mean, this is what we have seen when it came to Russian propaganda and disinformation within the EU. The EU has also developed strategies of protecting itself against those words or attempts. So there are examples to show that the EU can act, and it takes long. And by the way, people do not really want to see the positive narrative or narration, actually. I mean, people tend to focus on the problems and on the critical things and you name it. But actually, the EU is much more than paying a sum until you return your empty bottle or whatever. So we have to also look at the positive examples. We have to look at the positive narration, and we should not only look at the reactions, and we should not only react, we also should be active and show that we are a progressive power. And of course, I mean, it's like a big club, so different members have different opinions, but there are also rules of the game, and I think we need to be open here. And we should also go and say, on the other hand, if you don't play to the rules, if you don't comply, there will be sanctions. And I hope that things will change in the new legislation period. I mean, there are some facts that are given, and I don't have to mention them here. They are there. Right. Coming back to the influence of authoritarian regimes, disinformation, and influences taken from the outside. Of course, we have to fight all this. And yes, indeed, the EU has done quite a bit here. Mark. Right. The rules have been mentioned, the rules of the game. However, let me say, the strategy in Europe is no longer an attempt to block Orban, but to change majorities. And this is what we could see in Italy. And I am afraid that France might move in this direction too, if Michel Barnier has to find his majority in the right wing. And this is where I see the danger. And Christian Lindner's reaction was first and foremost to say no. So there is not much positive to hear from the traffic light coalition in Germany. So we should focus on the autonomy. This is certainly in the interest of Poland. It's probably also in the interest of France. It's going to be difficult in Germany. But that close links with the United States. Financial policy, well, here I would wish that this happened. And here Poland has acted already, and we know about the alliance with Hungary and other countries. Poland established such an alliance in order to fight for nuclear energy. And we might see what this means also with respect to alliances with Italy. And we will have to see what Ursula von der Leyen says, also with respect to the pressure. I mean, the guidelines are beautiful, right? However, it gets difficult as soon as you try to implement those beautiful guidelines. It happened before. The automotive industry intervened and others. And now, if this is being confirmed in elections, it remains to be seen what the Commission can do. So it's complex. And I fear that Germany and France have their own political difficulties, domestic policy difficulties. So it will be difficult for them to get closer. And maybe if Poland can play the role of the mediator, nice, but it's going to be difficult. And then you also have a lot of pressure in Poland, as you say, Joanna. So I believe that the three governments should try to move together. But it's going to be difficult.
Well, we have already quoted several aspects and topics that we all touch upon, and the hopes associated with the Tusk government at the time. The format was really a new impetus. Well, it will be difficult, in fact, but I think it is a very important format. And maybe you can tell us from your perspective where there are positive, where you would hope for positive impetus, or where you see it already. And maybe you can also break it down into the cooperation of the Greens in the countries affected, because cooperation in that format can mean a very important impetus for the European debate. This will be the last round, and I have tried to include the questions from the chat. Who would like to start? I'd say, Joanna, you make a start. Okay, all three. Right. If I had 3 wishes, well, that's all but easy, but where I see a real chance for cooperation is at the area of security policy. This is something that affects all countries in particular, and it is so important for Poland because of the geographical proximity since the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Europe cannot act on its own. We need the US and we need other alliances, but nonetheless, the EU, and this is where the three, France, Germany, Poland, could take a lead role and really mean the new source of energy for European security policy. This is why I see excellent potential for cooperation, and also the single market strengthen the economy and mutual dependence, of course, but in order to strengthen the single market and dependence from Asia, from China, to, well, kind of weaken this or the supply chains and their components or parts could instead be located in Europe. That's an area for cooperation. When it comes to immigration, well, that's of course also a disappointment of many voters when it comes to the more progressive people, the Citizens Coalition, Tusk, and Poland 2050. That's a relatively new party. So everybody was hoping for change, that there would be a more human rights-based treatment of people who come to Europe via the Belarus route. And of course, the refugees who are arriving are instrumentalized by the dictator Lukashenko. So it should be human rights-based instead, but it doesn't happen. So the government is continuing the old course, and the EU does not usher in change because the EU is really overtaxed with migration policy. For that reason, it will be difficult to establish new rules, but you know, strengthening the single market is an important aspect, as I've already mentioned, but there are joint interests, despite differences, that can advance Europe. Thank you, Mark. I agree with Joanna, and in this context, I also see possibilities for bigger European autonomy. There are clear economic aspects. And for that reason, I hope, so to speak, there is also the question, and this has already been asked in France, what is Germany willing to give also with a view to Ukraine? So all parties in the traffic light coalition should really be united in solidarity vis-à-vis Ukraine. And I also believe, when you break this down to the European Greens, that there should be a high level of exchange on political questions and needs on a European level. The French Greens, and it's only 5 members of parliament left from France, so that the Greens, that the parliamentary group stays together also in terms of critical questions. So this touches on the work on the European Parliament and also the national dialogue, because there are national differences between the Green Party positions. And what would make sense, despite all tactical differences and difficulties that the Greens have, dependent on the National Front with Mélenchon, La France Insoumise. But if this policy doesn't change, they need this alliance so as not to neutralize each other, and you also need an exchange of experience when it comes to a coalition culture, and it doesn't touch on the Greens only. And it was not necessary to have a lot of a long list of contents, but this will become increasingly important in the future. So how do you want to act politically? Because this is important for the Greens, also in France, but when it comes to the coalition and the electoral law, it's difficult. Oh, one important point that I forgot to mention, the Weimar Triangle. So the EU enlargement is an important topic, and of course, I fully neglected it, and Poland is a strong advocate of EU enlargement towards the East. It's an advocate for enlargement, but there are some ifs and buts, including cooperation within the EU concerning agriculture, the competition with newcomers, rules that have to be fulfilled. Also, the Baltic states, 20 years after the accession, we can really quote lessons learned, best practice examples, and we could really become an advocate for new accession candidates. Yes, we also mentioned it in the discussion with Terry. It's a new priority, and also for the Greens and for us as a foundation. We will pursue that. Last but not least, Roderick. Yes, I can link up to that because Germany and France have a joint expert group on the reform of the EU in order to enable the EU for enlargement, and this could also be enlarged by the Weimar Triangle so that we can include Polish experts and France, Germany, Poland as a tripartite group could really make very fruitful contributions here. In the COVID crisis, on the Green Deal, we heard so many good examples in moments of shock and crisis. And it is possible that even this year or next year, we'll have moments of shock where the EU and the national government will push their own limits. For example, should Donald Trump once again become president of the US, the financing of European defense and support for Ukraine could be discussed in a different light compared with the current situation, or should Moscow once again be at the doorstep of Kiev, there may be important changes and events. Another point that was important, mentioned by Terry, doing away with red tape. If we want to advance our energy agenda, we cannot wait years for an approval for a wind energy installation. So I think there are certain tools that we could make use of, and it could be a tool where Germany, Poland, and France could have a shared interest. And last but not least, the question of how the Greens will prepare themselves for the next European elections. And if Christian Lindner says on the Draghi report, I won't accept it anymore, the Greens may argue, we do accept it. So this could be an interesting idea to Europeanize the national election campaign. And it does make a difference who's in the government ultimately. Thank you very much. We are approaching the end of this event. It was great to have this discussion with you. It has become obvious that there are major challenges ahead of us, and in the center is the ability of the EU to act internally, externally with different policy areas. We as a foundation will monitor these activities very closely. I would like to thank the participants, Terry, Luisa Reh, my colleague here in Berlin, who has supported me in the preparation, and the interpreters and the technicians who supported us in the background. And I already mentioned it in the first part of this event. I would like to make you aware of the 23rd edition of Böll.Global, and it is on the 13th of September. Starting at 11 o'clock, a new Böll.Global will happen, a derailed integration debate, realistic approaches that are in line with the law. My colleague will deal with that question with our human rights, migration, and fleeing your country. This exchange and details of the program can be found on our website and also in your inbox. And once again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.